Dr. Hatfield. Today, we are going to speak about the devil and the demonic. But before we get there, if you have a Bible, please open it up with me to the book of John, chapter 20 in the New Testament, and let me give some context. So over these next 3 weeks, this time as we build up to Easter, often called Lent in the High Church, I want us to take note of the fact that in so much of religious talk, whatever your religion is, you find phrases like finding God or finding our way or finding peace. And then on the other side of the coin in secular self-help and psychology, you find words like finding your purpose and finding your true self and finding your inner being. But I want to show you that Christianity says something very different. Because instead of saying, here is how you find your way and find your true self and find the truth, Christianity preaches the good news of a God who in Jesus comes to find us. In fact, Easter is all about God in Jesus on a cross. His life, death, and resurrection come to find us exactly where we are, exactly as we are. It's about being found by Jesus. And over these next 3 weeks, we want to say this happens in innumerable ways. All of us, many of you can share testimonies of being in your brokenness and hopelessness and sin and being found by Jesus. But there are 3 specific stories we want to look at. After the resurrection of Jesus, it says that he appears to multitudes of people in multiple settings and times. But there are 3 specific people named, and the conversation so profound of Jesus finding them at one stage of life and seeing that into action as Easter. So the first one we're going to look at today is Mary Magdalene, who is found in the presence of demons. Next week, we're going to see how Thomas is found in crippling doubt. Maybe like me, you often find yourself in places of intense doubt. And then in our 3rd week before Easter, we're going to look finally at Peter, who is found by Jesus in failed conviction. Often the very thing that I promise myself I will never do, I will stand firm in, I fail in. Have you been found? Because here's the question that I want to ask all of us in Easter. Maybe you are secular in your thinking. Maybe you are spiritual. Maybe you are a Christian or a Buddhist. Or maybe you have no commitments to faith. But my question to you is very simple. Where do you find yourself at the moment? Where do you find yourself? Have you in a place of life? Have you faltered and fallen, failed? Do you maybe have this deep desire in your heart? Maybe you phrase it in a different way, but you say, man, I desire at the depth of who I am to experience the forgiveness and the hope and the healing and the wholeness of God. I desire to be found by him. And I want to invite you, come with me over the next 3 weeks as we discover not how we can find, but how to be found in Jesus. So, week 1, Mary Magdalene found in the presence of demons. John 20, we see that Jesus, on the Friday of Easter, he is executed. He dies. That Saturday is a dark moment for his followers, but that Sunday morning, Mary goes to the tomb, and the following happens. John 20, verse 11. But Mary stood outside the tomb crying. And as she was crying, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw 2 angels in white sitting where Jesus' body had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "Because they've taken away my Lord," she told them, "and I don't know where they've put him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. "Woman," he said to her, "why are you crying? And whom is it that you are seeking?" Supposing that he was the gardener, she replied, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will take him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." And turning around, she said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. In verse 18, Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them what he had said to her. Such a powerful moment of interaction. But here's the thing, over the next 3 weeks, if we are to understand the significance of these moments with Jesus, we need to understand who these people are. Otherwise, it will have no weightiness. So my question is, who is Mary? And the thing is, in the New Testament, we have almost 7 different plus Marys named for us in the narratives. It's almost like, I come from the Free State and everyone calls me Joe, but my name is actually Johan. And the reason for it is we were 4 Johans in my matric class. In the Free State, if you throw a rock, you hit a Johan every square meter, basically. So you need to differentiate yourself. And so the nickname Joe kind of stuck. But it was the same thing here. Mary was a very common name. There were many Marys at that time. But this specific Mary, we read about her earlier in the narrative of the life of Jesus. In Luke chapter 8, it says this: Jesus and his ministry is gaining traction, and it says, after he was traveling from one town and village to another, preaching and telling the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, but also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and sicknesses. And he names them, Johanna and Susanna, but this one woman, Mary called Magdalene. 7 demons had come out of her. That's pretty wow. Later, this controversial chapter in Mark 16, it would say that he appeared first to Mary Magdalene at the tomb, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. That's pretty hectic, friends. So what do we know about Mary Magdalene? She's called Mary Magdalene because she's from Magdala, which is on the southeastern part of the Sea of Galilee. But we know that in all 4 of the gospel accounts of the life of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, she is a disciple following Jesus. And in 2 key moments, we see her at the foot of the cross. She's there as Jesus is executed, but then also at the tomb. The very first person to lay eyes on God stepping into the pages of history, dead, resurrected again. Who is that person? It's Mary Magdalene. So profound moment, but we learn 2 facts about her earlier in her life that are truly astounding. The first thing is this, is we often in our minds imagine, someone who is oppressed by the devil, they're possessed. It's probably some very, basic person, very misunderstood, and they're an outcast, and they're poor, and they're not very educated. But what we see here is that she was most probably a very wealthy and successful woman. It says that together with 2 other people, they were actually shouldering the burden, supporting, forming the foundation financially of the ministry of Jesus after he had freed her. In a culture like the Middle East, that was, in the ancient Near East, not a common thing. So many people lived from hand to mouth. So here's someone who could not only support herself and her family, but she could support the ministry of a teaching rabbi. So she was most probably, in our context, think of a CA, think of a specialist in the medical field. Think of someone who is professional, who is educated, who's successful, who's well-spoken. And this person we hear, their life is filled with the demonic. We learn that Jesus drove out 7 demons the day that he met her. That's an incredible thought. Because you and me, maybe you're listening to this and you're thinking, listen, I hear you. This Bible stuff, maybe it was true for some people at some time, but here in Pretoria in 2022, we are modern people. We are advanced people. We are rational people. We are people of science and of deep thinking. This kind of stuff. What would my finances and my sexuality and my work, what would that have to do with the devil and the demonic? And I want to say today, what I think this passage is telling us is that maybe today you need to hear that the sexuality and the finances and the work life and your marriage, maybe it has everything to do with the demonic. Maybe a person like this in our city today, maybe for you, professional, educated, upstanding, high-performing, but overrun by the voices of the demonic. Now, of course, today I can't do a whole seminar on demonology. One of my mentors, he actually did a master's degree in demonology. That's not what we're going to do today. They often say you shouldn't open up a can of worms. Well, this is the mother lode of all the worms. This is the stadium full of worms. So we can't answer the million questions. That would take 50 sermons. I just want to ask 3 questions and interact with them. The first is this: is there a reality to the demonic? Secondly, what is the influence of the demonic? Thirdly, is there any hope against the demonic? So first question is this: is there a reality to the demonic? I don't know if you know this, but I want to say, as advanced and irrational and modern as we are, Satan and the demonic is alive and well in pop culture. People are obsessed and interested and intrigued and at times scared in a kind of exciting way by these themes, as they have always been. Last year, Lil Nas X had this whole controversy with his Satan shoe that he did with Nike and the music video that went with that. I cannot show this to you in church. You go and do your own research at your own peril, but it was a big thing. One of the biggest shows on TV at the moment is Lucifer. It's already in its 6th season. According to the metrics of Netflix, it's one of their most highest performing shows. Many years ago, as a millennial, I grew up with Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, which is this very calm and kind of wholesome show. The remake of that, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina by Netflix, man, it is everything but chill. It is dark and it is intense. But the thing is, the movie that changed everything, many years ago, long before I was born, 1974, The Exorcist. This was the movie that literally shifted a generation's thinking about the demonic. This movie, based on real events, mind you, obviously very colored in, but of this little girl who is possessed. Man, Time magazine ran this famous article where they said that there were teenagers, even priests, who could not sleep for weeks after watching this movie. There were some young people who were admitted to the hospital with anxiety after watching this movie. People were reported to throw up in the cinemas and run out in terror because of what they saw. But this is the water we swim in. Even Variety magazine said just a couple of months ago that the whole genre of the supernatural horror that is, it's so prevalent. Almost every second horror movie or series at the moment has a deep supernatural element to it. And they say that the supernatural genre is a hot streak for the movie business at the moment. In 2017 alone, it already crossed $1 billion of income for Hollywood and its extensions. So this is what everyone wants. But unfortunately, this then colors in how we see things. It's spinning heads and levitating bodies, and it's, otherworldly strength and unrestrained behavior and eerie voices and intense violence. This is how we see the demonic and the supernatural. But the question is, do you believe it, and is it real? Now, I can't roll out years of research here today, but let me just give you one thought. Well-respected psychiatrist Richard Gallagher, his research says the following: anthropologists agree that nearly all cultures have believed in spirits, and the vast majority of societies, including our own, have recorded dramatic stories of spirit possession and depictions of the same phenomena in astonishingly consistent ways offer evidence of their credibility. People of all times and spaces and ages have basically said the same thing. There are things that we cannot fully explain, that we experience, that goes above and beyond. And even though all these different cultures over all times have had different ways of phrasing it, there is a remarkable consistency in these supernatural experiences of people of all cultures. Dr. Michael Heiser, a theologian, I think he puts it so well. He says, even for us in the modern secular age, whether our militant atheist friends want to admit it, most people, even in the cultured post-Enlightenment technological West, they find a materialistic worldview where the only thing that's real is what my 5 senses can detect. They find that kind of worldview completely unsatisfying. This is not an argument for it being the truth. What it's saying is that people of all times, whether sacred, secular, spiritual, atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, people of all cultures have said we experience things on the inside, we experience things on the outside. There are things tugging at our hearts and minds and thoughts, and we cannot explain it. And to simply say it's all here in the material, that is not satisfying to the human heart. And I think the reason why people are so intrigued and interested in the Hollywood sense of the word is because I believe we are hardwired as the human being to seek out things that transcend our experience. I think there is a reality around us that we tap into at times. And our obsession in pop culture with Satan and the demonic and the supernatural is because our hearts are calling out for more than what we experience. So as a Christian, then, I want to go to the Bible and say, if anthropology says it's a reality, and if science says this is something that repeatedly comes back, and pop culture says we are always intrigued, what does the Bible say about the possible realities of this? Now, again, we can't do a whole study on Satanology and demonology and the supernatural, but let me give you just 4 quick thoughts about Satan and the demonic. First up, is that Satan simply means adversary or opponent, according to the Bible. All over the Old Testament, many different people are called Satan because they, in that moment, are opposing someone. They're an adversary in that moment. But what happened over the ages is that theologians and Jewish rabbis and teachers, they recognized the fact that behind all the great evil of the world, there seemed to be an even greater evil behind it. There seemed to be an ancient evil behind all of the evil activity, animating, influencing, bringing this dark kind of oppression. And so this evil, dark figure from Genesis 3 eventually got the name Satan. Not just one of the adversaries, but the opponent, the adversary. There's an ancient and cosmic evil behind so much of the brokenness of this world, and he is the Satan. But secondly, it seems that this Satan, this opponent, this adversary, it was pride that led him to fall as he rebelled against God. 1 Timothy 3:6 warns pastoral leaders not to be young in the faith, because if they are a recent convert, Paul says, this person may become prideful and fall under the same judgment as the devil. Isn't that interesting? That pride is the thing that leads to rebellion and a fall. Now, we don't know much in detail about this cosmic fall that the devil experienced as he rebelled against God. And people who claim to know these details, friends, run away from their content. If you've fallen down the rabbit hole on YouTube, you started with Minecraft and you ended up with 15 minutes in hell and the 7, personality types of Satan or whatever it is, we don't know that kind of detail. But the Bible gives us some clues as to this ancient happening where the devil was basically thrown out of his privileged space of relationship with God. I can't give you all these clues, but one of them, for instance, comes from the prophet Isaiah. As he is prophesying against this arrogant king of Babylon, as he does that, he starts touching upon, as his mind is opened up to see maybe beyond what we see, the prophet is shown almost the parallels between this arrogant king and this ancient, ultimate, arrogant force of evil. And he says of this force that it had fallen from heaven, Isaiah 44:12. And that this ancient dark figure at one stage said to himself, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of the assembly. I will make myself like the Most High, Isaiah 14. So it was pride that led to a rebellion and then a fall of cosmic proportions. But thirdly, Satan tries to influence and rule human affairs and the world. 1 John 5:9 just very basically says, the whole world is under the sway of the evil one. Not the control, but the influence, the sway of the evil one. In the shadows, influencing, tugging, twisting, trying to compel in a direction. The whole world is under the sway of the evil one. And finally, this is the most important characteristic that you can understand about the devil, about Satan, is this, that he is in his nature a deceiver and a liar. He is a liar. I mean, listen to this. Revelation 12:9. Satan, the one who deceives the world. That is what he has at his disposal. This is not an equally matched battle between God and Satan and its bulging biceps, as they are trying to arm wrestle one another. There is an infinite gap between the worm and the human and Satan and God. It's not like little steps. There's the worm and then human beings and then Satan and then a couple of steps higher, it's God. It's as infinitely far away from Satan as it is from the worm. God is in his own category of uncreated and then the rest. So what can Satan do? He can deceive, he can twist, he can lie, he can influence. When Jesus speaks of the nature of the devil in John 8, he is not mincing words. He says he was a murderer from the beginning, and he does not stand in the truth. Why? Because there is no truth in him. And when he tells a lie, he speaks from his own nature. Because he is a liar, he is the father of lies. This is the great opponent. And I think whether it's anthropology or science or intuition or our obsession with pop culture, I believe the Bible is saying there is a great evil behind all the evil. Twisting, influencing. And so the question then secondly is, what is the influence of the demonic? Let me keep it really simple today. If you want to understand the strategy and the plan of the heart, the direction of the demonic, it is the exact opposite of God. If God and his kingdom represents truth and grace and hope and wholeness, then the devil and the demonic represents the absolute opposite. Whatever it is that God wants for your marriage, for your finances, for your well-being, for his mission through your life, what he has come to establish, the enemy wants the exact opposite to that. That is what he is trying to do. Listen to the through line with all these descriptions. Satan hatches schemes, Ephesians 6. He's a tempter, Matthew 4. He blinds the minds of people, 2 Corinthians 4. He's at work in those who are disobedient, Ephesians 2. He is an accuser, Revelations 12. So get the picture of pop culture out of your mind. He is not appearing to us with green eyes and a pointy tail and a pitchfork and, horns on his head. That is too obvious. No, he has a much more profound plan. He wants to do two things. He wants to influence you in such a way that you don't know that it's him influencing you. And secondly, he wants you eventually to be so under the influence of his lying and scheming and twisting of truth that you just live that way yourself. Almost like a boat, just in momentum, you just go now in your own energy. Why? Because if you believe in your heart and mind that I am a piece of trash, I will live like a piece of trash. Craig Rochell's book, so helpful, Winning the War in Your Mind. He says our lives are always moving in the direction of our strongest thoughts. What we think shapes who we are. This is what he wants to do. So we see Mary Magdalene, oh wow, 7 demons. Man, she must have had like glowing eyes and she was crawling up the roof and, she was doing backflips and bending and speaking in a deep voice and she was throwing people around. The scary thing is that what we see in this passage is that Mary Magdalene, imagine again in our context, the CA, she could go to the office that morning and she looks exactly like the colleague next to her. Accomplished, professional, well-spoken, and yet her life could be fully under the influence of 7 demonic voices. Voices that try and twist, voices that try and break down identity, voices that try and distract her from who God is and what he's doing, voices that try and keep her occupied with the things of the world, voices that are the exact opposite to whatever God wants for her. without having to speak in a strange voice and appearing in goat skin or anything funny like that. The devil wants to influence you in such a way that you don't know it's his voice and that you just live in that way yourself. Today, it could be the case that your sex life is fully under the influence of the destructive voice of the devil. That your thoughts about finances and success and status is fully under the control of the destructive voice of the devil. That your thoughts about our country and your purpose and who God is and his goodness, what you are meant to do on this earth, all of that your worldview can be so twisted by these voices of pure evil. So I want to make it really practical for you today. If you take one thing away, make it this thing. In 1896, Charles Sheldon wrote a book called In His Steps, In the Steps of God, and he told the story of a man who came to ask himself the same question every day. What would Jesus do? In this situation, what would Jesus do? And so, again, millennial, in the late 90s, early 2000s, this book became very popular again, and this whole movement got birthed. What would Jesus do? And every Christian and their grandmother eventually had one of these bangles or shirts or tattooed on their forehead, which is not very practical because then you can't see it and ask yourself the question, but everyone was asking, what would Jesus do? Now, I want to say today, the Bible is saying there's another question that you and I have to think about, and it's this: what would Satan want? What would Satan want when it comes to your sexuality? What would he want when it comes to your finances and your generosity? What would Satan want when it comes to your relationships? What would he want with your marriage? What would he want with your parenting? What would he want with our country? What would he want with your emotional health and your love for Jesus? What would he want in terms of everything that you hold dear? He would want the opposite of God's truth, grace, wholeness, mission, and family. That is what he wants. And 2 Corinthians 2:11 so powerfully says, we should not be taken advantage of by Satan. How? If we are not ignorant of his schemes. He has no power in the life of the Christian. And so he has to scheme and twist and lie and tug and influence. And it's when we are ignorant not of his great power, but of his scheming, that we give him opportunity in our lives. I mean, think about it this way. We so often speak about toxic voices in our lives, toxic relationships, and how we should shun and remove these toxic voices in our life. But imagine truly toxic relationships. Imagine the controlling mother, or the bitter and the critical husband, or the emotionally abusive girlfriend, or the deeply jealous colleague sitting across from you, or the excessively dependent friend. We know that how those voices, people that have, because of brokenness in their own life, they have become so toxic, how those voices can influence you. They can pull your whole life in a skewed direction. Friends, if we can recognize the power of a toxic voice of relationship in our life, imagine the power of demonic voices in our lives. Imagine how Satan can skew your whole calling and passion for Jesus, your marriage and your parenting, the very dreams and desires that God has for your life versus what the world wants for you. This is what he is doing. I've got two elder sisters, and the youngest one of the two, she was once in a seminar hosted by this North African couple, speaking about the effect of the demonic realm, the supernatural in the lives of people in Africa, where much like the Middle East, much like South America, much like the further east you go, people are much more aware of the supernatural. And they were speaking about that out in the field, and at the end, there was a guy like me, white dude, who stands up and he puts his foot in his mouth because he asks this couple, listen, I get what you guys are saying. And we face that in South Africa as well. A lot of the black people, black culture in our country is dealing with the supernatural, the demonic. There's the sangomas and there's a whole bunch of ancestral worship and connection and all of this stuff. So how are we meant to deal with cultures in South Africa that are so influenced by the demonic? Now, innocent but misguided question. I get where this guy was coming from, but they properly scolded him. Because this North African couple was saying, what you miss is you think that because people are trying to communicate with ancestors, or they're going to sangomas, or they're going through certain rites and rituals, they are under the influence of the demonic. But what you don't realize, white person, in 2022 in Pretoria, with your technology and your modernism and your rationality and with your science, is how the West's obsession with sex and money and status is demonic. How the way that we bow down before careers as our primary identity is demonic. How marriage after marriage after marriage is shipwrecked because we are seeking for the thing that will make us whole in another person, in a bed, in a bottle, in a business. It's demonic. You are not dealing with cultures in South Africa that are under the influence of the demonic. You are dealing with a country that is faced with the demonic. And therefore, 1 Peter 5 in 8 and 11, he says this: be sober-minded, be alert. Your adversary, the devil, is prowling around your life like a lion, looking for someone he can devour, so resist him. And he says, we have to be sober-minded. Here on the strip in Hatfield, we understand. If you are not sober-minded, if you've had a bit too much to drink, then guess what happens? That girl who looks like an 11 out of 10, you realize later, no, she was not a girl, and she was more like a 5 out of 10. So being sober-minded means that instead of being drunk, where I don't see reality for what it is, I need to see the supernatural for what it is. And I think you can be drunk when it comes to the devil in two ways. The first way is that you are drunk because you are overemphasizing everything to the level of the satanic. Everything in your life, it's the devil. That red light this morning on your way to church when you were late, it's the devil. That performance review you had last week from your boss, it's the devil. That person that I was gossiping about them and they found out and they scolded me, it's the devil. That stage 8 load shedding, it's the devil. Well, that probably is the devil, but everything is the devil. Every flat tire, every issue in your money, in your finances, and relationship, it's all the devil. But the issue is we don't have to give the devil all the credit. Sometimes we are just not making quality decisions of relationship with Jesus. There are areas of our faith that we are reluctant to give over to God, and therefore they stagnate and they become so immature. Jesus wants to disciple us, grow us, sanctify us, make us more of who we are in Him. And it doesn't have to be the devil. Some of you are looking at your finances and you're saying, man, I need an exorcist to get the devil out of here. No, what you need is a budget. Some of you young adults are stepping over the sexual boundaries and you're moving in together and you're making poor choices, even though you're saying, but one day we're going to get married and we're going to make this commitment. And you're thinking, man, the devil is out to get us. No, it's Netflix and chill that is out to get your sexuality. It's making you immature and ineffective, and you are shamed in your own heart because you can't speak to people, because you're making choices that reflect not the heart of Jesus, but the heart of the enemy. Some of you are saying, man, my emotional state at the moment, I really know that the devil has got my number. No, what you need to hear today is that you just need a good counselor. You need better sleep patterns, less of your phone in your bed, and you need some good friends. It's not always the devil. I can be so drunk with spirituality that everything is the devil, and I miss the choices and the immaturity and the growth that I have as a Christian. What would Satan do today? What would he want with your sexuality? What would he want with your spending? What would he want in your relationships as a parent, as a mom, as a brother, as a business owner? What would Satan want? Just yesterday, I was driving to do a wedding, and just before that, my wife and I, we picked up a scrap. And, I'm a very gut response person, so often I say things immediately and it's not helpful, and so I just kept quiet, and I thought, let me just think about this first. And as we were driving, my wife just sent me this very well-worded message, and I read it, and I just realized, as I was just praying and speaking to the Lord, as I have this sermon in my heart, I realized this is that moment. What would Satan want in my marriage right now? He would want me to be blisteringly angry. He would want me to say things in anger to my wife that I don't mean. He would want me to distrust her and to break down our relationship. He would want me to be passive-aggressive or to ignore her or to be cold and quiet. And it was the moment that I realized I can recognize what he's trying to do. Because that's the opposite. If you are drunk and he's in everything, the other way of being not sober-minded is he's in nothing. And your religion is so practical, it's so rational, that it's basically just a self-help program. You just come to church, you read the Bible very literalistically, and you just try in your own strength be a very good person because you basically laugh at the idea of the supernatural. This is silly. And you don't recognize the lion who is prowling around your marriage, prowling around your passion for Jesus, prowling around the kind of movies you watch, the entertainment that fills your heart, what actually develops and dictates your worldview around sexuality and status and what success is. If we see him in nothing, he will get us in everything. I need to be sober-minded. And so finally, is there any hope against the demonic? And I want to just read to you one of the most beautiful verses in the Bible. 1 John 3 verse 8 says, "The devil has been sinning from the beginning, but the Son of God, Jesus, was revealed for this purpose, to destroy the devil's works." He did not come to simply be a good teacher. He came to announce and establish a kingdom and break down and destroy another kingdom. He has not come to partake in the game, but to end the game. The enemy has nothing because Jesus has crushed him on the cross. Why in Easter are we speaking about the devil? Because that is part of what happened on the cross. For centuries, the church has been saying, Christ is victor. There is a victory that happened on the cross when Jesus drew upon himself sin, Satan, death, and brokenness. And in the moment when Satan thought, here is defeat for Jesus, it was the other way around. He was raised to life as he stood in victory over the brokenness of death and Satan and the demonic. We need to realize that if we are in Jesus, I cannot be possessed. I cannot be controlled fully. I cannot have Jesus leak out of me. No, where Jesus makes his home, the heavy weightness of Jesus expels whatever the enemy is doing. I can only give mental and emotional footholds to the enemy. I can only allow my thoughts to be twisted and influenced. But my home, my identity, my standing before God is secure in Jesus. That's why Romans 16:20, Paul with confidence says, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. It's not who you are, but it's who is in you. Friends, Satan is on the defensive. When Jesus says to Peter, on this rock I will build my church, and he says what? The gates of Hades, of hell, will not overcome it. Friends, a gate is not an offensive weapon. You don't run into a battle with a gate. A gate is for defense. It's for cowering. It's saying the circle is getting smaller. Jesus has declared victory on the cross. The war is over, and now he is just mopping up the little battles on his way to the time in the new creation when every tear will be wiped away and all untrue things will become true as it's swallowed up in joy. This is the truth. I stand in the victory of Jesus. I put on the full armor of God, as Ephesians 6 says. Why? So that I can stand against the schemes of the defeated one. I just ask you again, what would Satan want? What are the voices that have so taken over your life? Because here, as we end, Mary Magdalene, with tears in her eyes, she's broken, she's distraught, she's followed this man, he's everything to her, and she's at the tomb and she's walking around and she doesn't know what's going on, and she sees this man maybe with tears in her eyes and it's still dark outside. She doesn't know who he is, she doesn't recognize him, and as she's turned around, he simply says to her, Mary. And here's someone who years before had these 7 demonic voices constantly speaking to her about her identity and her worth and the uselessness of faith in God and what her purpose is, and using her sexuality to gain status and spending her life in just distractions. These 7 voices one day in her life got interrupted by the voice of truth in Jesus. And years before he met her, the voice of truth broke the spell. It drove out the influence of these 7 voices. And here that day, John 20, it says that we recognize, or John 10, the voice of our shepherd. And Mary, she simply had to hear that voice say one word, and she knew. Freedom has risen from the grave. Mary. I just want to ask you, maybe it's time to do a spiritual audit of your life. Where have the voices of the enemy become so prominent that you realize your sexuality is reflecting more the satanic and the demonic than the kingdom of God? The way I obsess over and I spend money, it's become satanic instead of the kingdom of God. The way that my worth is found in what I do and what I have and what others say about me, it's satanic. It's like 7 voices leading me to destruction. And where today must Jesus come and find you and just say, Lachai, Kevin, Jason, Bosov, I want to come and interrupt these demonic voices with my truth. Let me crush the schemes of Satan in your life under the authoritative feet of the one who died and who rose again. Have you been found? Allow him